So we're going to be talking about Apache's awesome race condition that they refuse to fix, primarily because they don't want to modify core.c without changing the major version number, which is really annoying. Because it is a real vulnerability, and they have documented it, which is their way of fixing it. So they think if they document it, people kind of know about it, and they're mitigating the problem, but it still exists, so that's not really a solution at all. I guess all of you know me, so you don't have my information.
Wait, I didn't have that.
Oh.
You change your email address and user profile name like 3 times a year.
I know. That's the thing that I do. That's Twitter, email, and my blog where I write things. I work for Bluehost. We're a shared hosting company. That used to be all we do, which is why I have shared hosting 3 times. That's kind of what we built our company on. So we're really in touch with shared hosting problems and things that come up when we do shared hosting. Our culture at Bluehost is more of we like to fix things rather than work around them. We're not afraid to go in and write patches for software and then build our PMs and roll it out instead of, paying somebody else to do that or hiring a vendor to do something. We'd rather just build it and make it work. The vulnerability we're going to be talking about is a classic race condition. It happens all over the place. Developers everywhere make this mistake. It's an easy one to make if you don't expect variables to change without your knowledge. So the most basic overview of the vulnerability is Apache checks the permissions, follows the symlink, checks the permissions on the target file, and then later it opens that file without rechecking to make sure it's still the same thing. On your own VPS or dedicated server, it probably isn't a huge deal for you, unless you have multiple users that can't see each other and you don't really want looking at each other's stuff. But it has a huge impact on shared hosting because we put 1,000 people on the same server that can all run whatever they want, and we say that's okay. We have users that still run Joomla 1 because that's what their developer built for them and they don't want to change away from it. So it's pretty much a reality for us that we're going to have compromised code running on our servers all the time. And we have to take precautions to mitigate things that those compromised scripts will try to do, even though, instead of trying to get rid of them. There's pretty much no way we can ever get rid of all of the malware on all of our servers. So that's why we fixed this race condition rather than just documenting it. So as far as exploiting it goes, it's extremely simple. I'm assuming everybody knows what a symlink is, but just in case you don't, it is a file that points to another file in Linux. So what you do is you have a symlink that points to a file that you own, and then you change that back and forth quickly to a file that you want to get the information out of.
You change the symlink?
Yes, you change the symlink, where that points. So you'll change it between a dummy file and, say, somebody's WordPress configuration file or Joomla configuration file. Because once you exploit it, you can dump that configuration file and get their MySQL username and password, which is probably the same as their cPanel username and password, because they probably didn't set up another user. So once you can dump people's config files, you pretty much have their whole account. So I'll draw it on the whiteboard for people who are more visually inclined. That's the symlink. This is a file you own. file somebody else owns. All you do is change it to point here, and then point here, and then point here, and then point here, with a delay of maybe like 10 microseconds or something like that, because you want to get it between the time that Apache checks the ownership of the target file and when Apache opens it. And there's not a ton of time there, but there is enough to make it work. So, yeah.
Good question. So in order to change the symlink, you would have to have write permissions on the server already, so that...
Yeah, so the assumption here is that we're dealing with like a compromised WordPress or compromised Joomla or something like that where the attacker can run code on the server. So if you have a private host, you're pretty much already screwed because that user can probably read everything you don't want them to read anyway. But on a shared host where we have super tight shell restrictions, we have fake shells that users log into where they can't read other people's stuff, that's where this matters. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So some people think that Apache fixed this with the symlinks if owner match directive, but they didn't because it still has the race condition. But a lot of people think that that's going to protect them because, oh, hey, it checks the ownership of the file before, make sure it matches the symlink before it follows it. Well, it does, but it still opens the file way down later, so that doesn't help at all. And then some people think they fix it by documenting it. No, that doesn't count at all. And I'll show you real quick. So here are Apache docs. And where we go? Okay, so here's symlinks owner match. Said this option should not be considered a security restriction since symlink testing is subject to race conditions being circumventable. And so really all they're doing here is providing a false sense of security. There's no reason this should exist unless it works. Yeah.
But this is documented, right?
Yeah, totally documented. So every user of Apache should totally have read all of the documentation before they started using it.
So here's the thing. When I document how I want my application to work, it just starts working that way. I don't have to change the code. So
Yeah.
Why is it different for them?
That's the magic of development. Is that when you document it, it works exactly that way. No.
All I have to do is change the wiki and my code starts.
Yeah, we'd all like it to be that way. So yeah, there it is. That's their documentation. That's why they excused this when I sent it to the Apache dev list and Apache security. They said, oh yeah, well it's documented. It's kind of a big change to core.c, so I don't really want to do that. So I think that's just ridiculous. So no, Apache didn't fix it with anything. So let's look at some code now. This is going way faster than I originally thought, which is good because lunch is next, so we can all get down on the lunch line faster.
So Eric, will you be showing us how you discovered the race condition?
I didn't discover it. It was brought to me as a project to see how well I could write C code, because my boss didn't think that I could write it well at all. So he said, how's your C? I said, pretty good. He said, okay, fix this. And I said, okay. And that's pretty much how it started. So let me get back into my VPS that I set up just to demonstrate this. If I can find the root password. There we go. So you can see, we can look at the history. I've done almost nothing. All of you guys read this?
Yeah.
Okay. I've done almost nothing on the server aside from I created some users. I grabbed the Apache source, installed some dependencies, and compiled it and installed it. That's really it. So I haven't done anything special. There's nothing extra running on the server that enables this to work. I literally grabbed the source code and compiled it. So let's exploit it. So now we're user A, and user A has grabbed my GitHub repo, which contains the proof of concept exploit code, as well as the patch. And they've compiled it to look and try to exploit user B/private. So this isn't even in user B's public directory. So user B thinks they've done really well here by moving their configuration file up into their home directory, which shouldn't be publicly accessible to anybody. And if user A tries to access this file directly from a shell, it won't work at all because they don't have permissions for it. So what we do here is just compile this code. It's not long at all. That's all of the code. Everything up here is just comment. So we compile it. Run it. And then we pop open a browser, which is over here. I've got this already set up. So we'll get some forbiddens. That's the dummy file that we linked to originally. That's, oh, there it was. Did you see it? We got the private file. Dummy, forbidden, dummy. All you have to do is refresh. There it is. That's the contents of the private file.
Whoa.
That's all you had to do.
So what you're saying is that if I have some assumptions about how a typical user might set up their configuration file, and I can get on this shared hosting account, if I know that person's username, or if I just guess at a common username and a common config file, I could just run curl 60 times a second and see if one of those times I get that file.
Yep. And so it's even worse than that, because every single WordPress installation by default uses the document root /wp-config.php as their config file. And that contains MySQL username, password, and all the other settings for WordPress that they have. If they're using any extra security, whatever, it's in there.
So you've got one dumb user. That's maybe a little bit derogatory, but their username is cooljoe7 and their password is password.
Yeah.
So they were easy to compromise because they never set up their account.
Right.
And so they've been paying for hosting for 3 months. They haven't done anything with it yet.
Yep.
This attacker is able to guess that password, because I'm sure there's, out of those thousands of people, there's a lot of them that probably do have passwords that are password.
Yeah. And then they can dump everybody else's config files on the entire server.
So this is like legitly scary.
Yeah, for sure. For anybody that's in shared hosting, this is a serious vulnerability. And
because when you first said like microseconds, I'm like, yeah, so what?
well, yeah, but it's not hard to sleep for a couple microseconds. Like, that's no big deal. And you can change that all over the place. That's just where I found it was most effective. But it's so easy to exploit. That's what I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, now it's even easier because you're getting code for it.
Yeah. What's funny about the code, so I wrote that proof of concept just so I could do my testing with the patch that I was writing.
Uh-huh.
After I was done writing the patch and we had deployed it everywhere on Bluehost, I published the proof of concept, and about a week later, I found it on our servers running that because it had been injected as the payload of some malicious user, or yeah, some malicious user compromised somebody, and they were running my proof of concept trying to exploit other people on the server. It didn't have my name in it, luckily, but it was like copyright Bluehost Incorporated 2012.
Wow.
Yeah, great job.
Wow.
And I'd imagine the proof of concept is out there on like DreamHost and GoDaddy. You know, just stealing people's credentials.
Well, I mean, it's kind of important sometimes to force people's hands because, like, that whole GitHub thing, where the Russian guy, I remember like 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, the Ruby exploit.
Yeah, like the guy contacted the GitHub people and the Ruby people and was like, "Hey, I found a serious vulnerability," and they just shrugged him off like, you can change the configuration file for that.
Yeah.
Or like, we'll get around to it. And he's like, okay, boom, root user, what now?
And I tried to be nice to the Apache people. I was like, hey, you know, this exists. You should fix it. And they were like, no, it's documented. And I was like, okay, well, here's a patch to fix it. You should consider implementing this. And granted, my patch was not great. I had spent like 3 weeks working on it. And it was very amateur C code. I had re-implemented some functions of APR that I shouldn't have and that are fixed now. But the response that I got was, no, because you changed core.c, you should put this in a module if you want it. And I was like, well, you can't really put it in a module because the problem is endemic to Apache core. Like, that's where the problem is, so it should be fixed there. And then I also got kickback from other people saying, oh, well, we fixed this in the kernel. Why would you force the kernel to fix a security vulnerability that's in Apache?
Wait, I don't understand how you would fix it in the kernel. That doesn't even make sense.
They were doing some kind of symlink resolution. They would put a microsleep in kernel space that checks to make sure it's not changing before they open it. And there were 2 or 3 different iterations of fixes in the kernel. I looked at a couple of them and I thought they were stupid because it's an Apache problem. It's not a kernel problem. Not a Linux problem, it's an Apache problem. So, yeah. So now let's fix this server so that we can't just, yeah.
Just a quick question about the exploit. So when you run the exploit, the attacker will exploit a single user, which grants them access to every user, or they have to exploit each directory one at a time?
So it's a targeted attack. So you are on a server attacking other users on that server,
Right.
but just one at a time.
Oh, okay.
Well, so my proof of concept attacks them one at a time.
Right.
You could write something that reads etc password because that's readable by everybody on a Linux system and readable from Apache. So you can read in that file, grab all the usernames on the server from that file, iterate through them, and dump everybody's config file.
Right. You could just assume everyone's got WordPress.
Yeah.
Just do
And 9 times out of 10, you're going to be
username.
correct because in shared hosting, everybody runs WordPress or Joomla. You grab those 2 use cases, and you've got everything. You've got the keys to the kingdom on that server.
So
That was an excellent board game, by the way. I don't know if you ever played it.
Keys to the kingdom? I've never heard of it. I just know the
You'd
phrase.
have to pay like $300 to get on eBay right now. Sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so let's go fix this server real quick. So we're going to go out of user A, back to root. I've got Apache source right here. So all I'm going to do is git clone. Let's get this. Got the repo right here. We want HTTPS. Grab the source, git clone. There's the patch. Go into the source directory. Great, it's patched. We will run the exact same thing we did before, but we're going to stop it first. So this goes pretty fast because I grabbed a 4-core VPS instead of a 1-core VPS. but it does stay good.
Is that a DigitalOcean net block I saw?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Oh, we need to make one first. Does anybody have any questions while this is trialing? We can talk about more things.
Were we actually seeing it at
Yeah,
Bluehost?
we were seeing it before we had this patch. Not on a super broad scale. It wasn't something we were like, oh no, we need to fix this right now immediately. We weren't seeing it on that scale. We started seeing it a lot more. Oh, I grabbed the patch. Hold on one second. We started seeing it a lot more after we published. And I imagine other hosts did too.
What was the method of publishing you used? Was it just on the Apache forums or something, or is it?
The Apache dev mailing list was, I emailed them and then got all that kickback. Somebody asked for the proof of concept, so I gave it to them there. So I published that on the dev mailing list. And then I also posted, Apache has a security bug
Specific
submission site, so I submitted it there and never got any response from them. I don't think they care. I'm trying to remember where I put the updated patch because it's not.
This is really only good for exploiting other users on the system that got one.
Yeah. But it's good because, I mean, you might have the most security conscious user who is always up to date. They, subscribe to their WordPress mailing list, and they always update immediately after there's a vulnerability or something like that. And it doesn't matter at all because there's some other user on the box that can just dump their config.
When was it you guys fixed this?
It was like 2 months after I started working at Bluehost, which would have been like August, September 2012. Okay, this is supposed to work now. It might not. But we could go load up this proof of concept on a Bluehost server and not be able to exploit it because all of our servers are protected. cPanel actually grabbed my patch from the Apache mailing list, and it's now included in Easy Apache. So it's an option when you're running through the Easy Apache steps.
So it's not even default?
They have 4 different options for fixing the vulnerability. This is one of them. They have some other one that's modularized with Apache. But again, I think it's kind of dumb to write a module to fix this because it's in core. That's where the problem is.
And the biggest complaint that they gave you is they didn't want to change the core.
Yeah, I didn't want to change core.c, and so I had included a static string in one of my checks that I'm supposed to use a variable for. But rather than like fixing it or contributing back or saying yes, this is an issue, they said no, we're not going to fix this because the code's bad and you should feel bad. Which is fine. I mean, the code was not great. It's still not great in this version of the patch, but I've got a newer one that's a little more standards compliant and does things better. Oh, hey, good stuff. Okay, it started. So now let's go back over here. Actually, let's do this. Put that over there. So the patch is applied, we've recompiled. Oh, I need to go be user A. Sorry, this was smoother when I thought about it in my head. So now that user's running the exploit again, and we can try to exploit it. Get some forbidden messages, get the dummy file a whole bunch, get some not founds, but we will never get the actual file because it stopped.
Does Apache log anything? When
Yeah, I had some logs in there. I'm not sure where they went. Because this is so vanilla, the Apache installation on here is so vanilla, I can't remember where the logs are by default. It's probably in user A. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, so we've got all of this not accessible. Oh, there it is. Can't raise condition of user. Attacker 500, victim. Oh, the UAE is wrong. Open file owner is 501. So that's my patch in action. And it doesn't matter what you do, you still can't exploit it. So I like that. We can go look at more code if you want, or we can be done and go to lunch. Or if you guys have questions. Let's look at this more code.
When you update it to be more standards compliant, are you going to try and resubmit it?
So I think I'll reply back to my really old thread on the mailing list and just say, hey, this is managed on GitHub now. So if you want the newer patch, go ahead and grab it. Some people complained, so the patch does an extra stat on every request that comes through. So one extra file system stat.
But that's nothing because it's already cached in memory.
Exactly. It's already in the kernel cache because we've already checked it earlier in the code. So provided it's the same file,
It's a synchronous
it's
call.
a cache.
It's you have no lag on that.
Yep. So there really shouldn't be any problems with this unless
But That was actually a discussion in Node.js at one point, because there's times where you want to stat something twice and people are like, oh, 2 asynchronous calls, but actually
Yeah.
it's synchronous. It only is made asynchronous to fit the Node API, and then it's still actually synchronous because when it goes into the VM and actually calls it in the same loop.
Yeah. And then it's in the kernel cache anyway. So.
Yeah.
So this is where my code is. You'll notice I compare AP document root with user local Apache HT docs. That was a pain point for some of the people on the forum because that's not a standard document root, and I should be using HTTPD root, which is a macro. So I fixed that in a new one. I also fixed where that subprocess env is. We don't use that anymore because it's exposed. You can grab that in like a PHP script or something like that. There's
What is that?
So R is the request object. Subprocess env is a memory pool where you can store crap. But subprocess env is exposed to the environment. So anybody running any script can grab the key spt doc root and see the doc root that we're storing, which comes from the user module in Apache. I fixed that. We use our notes now, which is the appropriate place for modules to store random information they need in other places in Apache. But most of it is the same. The logic is the same. It's simple. All we do is we grab the Symlink owner's information, and we open the file, and then we stat the file descriptor. Because then we know for sure that's the file we're about to read from. So that's the whole patch pretty much.
So here's a question. This kind of exploit on a multi-threaded system, is it, or a multi-core system, is it possible that a process could still be changing the permissions while that other process is running? Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter at this point because we open the file regardless of what it is, and then we stat the file descriptor. And if that doesn't match the original requester's, well, the ownership of the original requester's document root, then we throw it away. We throw the whole request away. So we don't have to worry about some other kind of race condition like a multi-threaded situation because we stat the open file. Apache has already said, great, we're going to serve this. And it has opened the file. It hasn't read anything yet, but it has opened it. And we stat that file descriptor to make sure that the ownership is right there. And then if it's not, we just close it and go away.
Oh, okay, because at this point, since you've already opened the file, you have a handle on that file.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter at that moment if things change or not.
Right.
Because you're no longer working with the sim, like you're working with the actual file itself.
Right.
Okay, got it. Makes sense.
So that's the way it should be fixed in Apache. So, are there any other questions? We can read more C code if you guys want.
You should just read C code. That's fine.
I re-implemented this stat fd APR call because I didn't know that it already existed under a different name. It's like APR file stat or something like that. I put it in the wrong place. That's fixed now in the new patch. It's exactly the same functionality. But, yep. Most shared hosts should have this fixed in one way or another. But if they don't, I mean, you should probably tell them about it.
GoDaddy might be too busy putting girls in bikinis on race cars to know.
Yeah, they might be busy doing that. That Arizona-based shared host. But yeah, that's pretty much my whole presentation. So We're like 15 minutes under.